Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for waiting. I hope you've all had a good lunch where you are. First of all, I'm Annick Lawrence, and on behalf of the ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund team, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. And I'm sure what I'm sure to be an enlightening discussion on how digital solutions are being used to bridge labor market demand and the education sector. This is a common and ongoing challenge in many of our countries. This webinar is organized with the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and the Asian Development Bank. So I'm excited to introduce you to our speakers, but first I'll share a little background about this webinar and go through some guidelines. So this is as you can see, the fifth session of our ongoing ASEAN Australia Smart Cities webinar series, with each one focusing on digital solutions that aim to help cities tackle specific issues related to the improvement of city planning systems, service delivery, and financial management. If you wish to receive invitations and updates about our upcoming sessions, please sign up for our mailing list using the QR code, and that should be on the upper right side of your screen. And just some housekeeping rules before we proceed with today's discussion. So the slides from this session's meeting will be shared with everyone by tomorrow, along with a link to the webinar recording, and this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We'll also be sending out a post-event survey, which we hope everyone will take a moment to fill out. This will really help us better understand you, our audience, and improve our upcoming webinars. The format for today is that we'll have a panel discussion, and then we'll open the floor afterwards for questions. In the interest of time, we will not be using the raise hand function on Zoom platform, but we do encourage everyone to submit your questions through the Q&A box as we go along. You can find this at the bottom of your screen. When submitting your questions, just indicate which speaker you're directing the question or whether it's open to everyone. And we'll try to accommodate as many questions as we can towards the end. So without further ado, let me introduce to you Ms. Cleo Kawaki, who's our Deputy Director General for ADB's Southeast Asia Department, to give the introductory remarks. As the DDG of Southeast Asia Department, she oversees a portfolio of over 20 billion in loans and grant assistance, ranging from large road and infrastructure projects to education, health, and rural development. Prior to this position, Ms. Kawaki was the Director of the Energy Division in the Central West Asia Department, and where she was responsible for the business development and implementation of a $7 billion portfolio for the Central West Asian countries, as well as the CARIC program's Energy Sector Committee. Without further ado, over to you, DBG.
Thank you, Annika. Can you hear me? Am I okay?
Yes, I hear you clearly.
Okay, it's a great pleasure for me to be a part of this webinar. I have a 21-year-old and a 19-year-old, so this topic is very close to my heart. I've been dreaming of the day when my kids will get a job, but I feel a bit anxious on the possibilities. So, well, COVID-19 has made everything worse. So it has impacted all of us. ADB estimates that the global economy could suffer between 5.8 trillion and 8.8 trillion in losses, equivalent to 6.4% to 6.7% of the global gross domestic product. For our countries or Southeast Asia, the contraction is estimated to be 3.8%, and this is the first time that the region goes into a contraction since the early 1960s. I mean, but beyond the GDP numbers, the progress on poverty and inequality reduction is said to have reversed maybe by 10 years. And millions of jobs have been lost, and youth are finding it very difficult to get their first jobs. So the mismatch between the required skill demanded by employers versus the skills delivered by education institution is a reality in most ADB member countries, even before the pandemic. With the economic changes and uncertainty, ability and agility of labor to match the market becomes even more important. Labor market assessments show across key sectors there are a lot of job seekers, but without the required skills. Higher education and technical and vocational education institution has to align with markets to maximize impact. Well, like we see in like eBay or even Tinder in their own niches, technology can play a role in providing transformative solutions to bridge the gap between demand and supply. Well, in this case, it's the labor market demand and the education sector. Technology also presents the potential to scale education opportunities, break down barriers, and ensure quality learning for all. Even in under-resourced environments like now, all governments are suffering physically. This is the time that new technologies can play a bigger role. Today's ASEAN Australia Smart Cities Trust Fund webinar aims to support knowledge sharing on how digital technology can identify skills gaps and create link between employment training and local labor market, and opportunities for school to work and career transitions. We are grateful for Australia for this partnership. And this is the fifth series in the series, as Annika mentioned, on how smart digital solutions are helping cities around the world to improve their planning, service delivery, and financial management. Let me tell you a little bit about what the fund is doing. It assists ASEAN cities in enhancing their planning systems, service delivery, and financial management by developing and testing appropriate digital urban solutions and systems. There's pilots in multiple cities, interventions across Southeast Asia that will build on ASEAN's own efforts to create a community that is competitive, resilient, and well-connected. And the fund is committed to work with participating cities by providing support for project feasibility studies, design preparation, and implementation of investment projects, facilitating city transformation to become more livable, resilient, and inclusive, while in the process, identifying scalable and replicable best practices across cities in Asia and Pacific. Through the fund, we aim to help city of Canton City of Canton Phom Binh in Lao PDR to anticipate labor market challenges and make the youth ready for formal urban employment through digitization. The fund is also supporting pilot development of the labor market information system that includes digital matchmaking tools for skills, together with the provision of high demand skills through e-learning modules. We are confident that this project would help government in enhancing its own labor market information systems and developing its distance learning capacity that is becoming highly relevant since the COVID-19 epidemic. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk to you a bit, and I look very forward to the panel discussions. Thank you. Over to you, Annika.
Thank you so much, DDG Kawaki. And yes, that is a complicated city name to pronounce in Savannaket province in Lao PDR. Thank you so much for framing today's discussion and highlighting the complexity of the skills mismatch challenge that seems so entrenched in the school to work transition for many students and in bolstering productivity for government and the private sector. As you mentioned, this really is an issue that, that affects everyone. You're also very right that it requires innovative approaches and trying something new rather than discussing the challenges that we in the sector know all too well, but continue to do the same thing because it's well accepted. And so we have a lot to learn today from the speakers on our panel. But before I introduce our first speaker, we want to do a quick temperature check on our participants' views with a quick poll. Maybe we can project that here. So I'll just read it out loud for everyone. How well do you think digital solutions are being used in your country to link labor market demands and the education sector? extremely well, very well, fairly well, not well at all, or to your knowledge, no digital technology is being used for this purpose. Please select your answer now, and we'll close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see. So, okay, it looks like about half have responded that it not well at all. So I think that this is a great opportunity. This panel will have a great opportunity to share some insight in a couple cases where it is working. So without further ado, maybe we can move on to our first speaker. Ms. Redlyn Agub, who is the chief of the e-TESDA division of the Philippines Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, or better known as TESDA. Ms. Agub is the first trainer to be certified by TESDA for the competency developing learning materials for e-learning, and currently leads the development of courses and management of the TESDA online program, development platform that offers free technical vocational courses in the Philippines. This afternoon, Ms. Agub will be presenting their experience in digitizing TVET in the Philippines through TESDA's online program. Over to you. I think you're still on mute, Redlyn.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm Redlyn Agub, and I head the e-TESDA division, which is in charge of managing and developing e-learning materials for Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, or TESDA. Next slide, please. The TESDA online program is a learning management system of TVET in the Philippines that aims to make technical education accessible to more Filipino citizens through the use of information and communication technology. It is a platform that offers massive open online courses for free. Next slide, please. This platform was conceptualized and launched in 2012 with objectives of: one, providing and expanding access to technical vocational education and training, and two, ensuring the quality of TVET provision through standardized content by exploiting the possibilities of online learning. The platform was primarily developed for upskilling of workers, including overseas Filipino workers, out of school youth, women, mothers, then eventually students or trainees. Originally, the intention of this digital effort was to offer courses with skills that can be practiced at home. But due to its successes, it is continuously expanding to courses that can be offered by training institutions or schools using the blended learning approach. Next slide, please. Most of the courses offered in the TESDA online program are developed by our in-house course development team under the e-TESDA division. And currently, the TOP, or the TESDA online program, offers online courses in the following sectors: agriculture, automotive, electrical and electronics, entrepreneurship, human health and healthcare, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration. Next slide, please. Information and communication technology, lifelong learning skills, maritime, beauty care services, tourism, and training programs for trainers and assessors in TVET. We also have developed online modules for 21st century skills. To date, the most enrolled courses are from entrepreneurship, uh, information and communication technology, and tourism sectors. Prioritization of courses for development is in coordination with the industry and other stakeholders through our planning office. Next slide, please. During the lockdown, due to COVID-19 pandemic, the TESDA online program received a very massive following from its 1.4 million users accumulated from 2012 to 2019, it now ballooned to 2.5 million registered users, an addition of 1,192,000 from January to November 2020 alone. 91,103 of them are overseas Filipino workers and their dependents. These users enrolled 1,192,754 courses with a completion rate of 50.25%, which is unprecedented. The TESDA online program awards certificate of completion to completers. Completers are encouraged to practice the skills before taking the national competency assessment. Next slide, please. The successes of the platform, TESDA was able to offer TVET programs even during the lockdown. This platform was very instrumental in educating the public about COVID-19 pandemic through its course called Practicing COVID-19 Preventive Measures in the Workplace. This course was developed in-house and was completed by 141,081 users, making it the most enrolled course during the pandemic. This course was reviewed and vetted by the Department of Health before it was offered to the public. Following the success of the above course is the course on performing solid waste management in the workplace, which is reviewed and vetted by the National Commission on Solid Waste Management in partnership with other government agencies such as Department of Health, the Metro Manila Development Authority, and the Department of Natural Resources. Some 20,753 completers were recorded for this program in 4 months of implementation. Aware of the restrictions of the new normal, TESDA developed its guidelines for flexible learning, of which blended learning is essentially indispensable. Realizing that TVET trainers needed teaching skills utilizing e-learning materials, the course Facilitate e-learning sessions was developed and implemented. To date, Philippine TVET trained 8,303 trainers from its over 20,000 trainers all over the Philippines. Next slide, please. How do we ensure alignment with industry requirements? This development process is carefully and diligently being followed by our in-house developers. It makes sure of a 3-stage validation sessions with our practitioners and our educators. We call them our subject matter experts. In this diagram, the yellow boxes represent 3 validation sessions. During the sessions, we make sure that the practices are aligned both to the competency standards and actual industry practices. All technical terms are carefully reviewed, and learning activities are validated by technology trainers. Alpha testing and beta testing ensure ease of use by learners and overall effectiveness of the course. Next slide, please. What are the challenges in implementing digitalized TVET in the Philippines? First, previously our LMS was co-located or utilized a co-located server, which experienced issues during the influx of users reaching out up to 30,000 new users per day during the lockdown. The Philippines, number 2, the Philippines is not known to have fast internet connection. Many areas are yet to be connected. The 3 most connected regions near the national capital region or Manila consist of 50% of the total registered users. Also, trainers were used to face-to-face sessions. They do not use the internet. Our resources were limited, and we have limited funding for human resources. Next slide, please. What solutions did we employ, and what are we planning to improve? On our digitalization efforts? First, we had to migrate our LMS from a co-located server to the cloud. So we are now migrated to AWS, which hosted us for free for 5 months, and we are thanking them. But now the government has provided us with the funds. Number two, trainers were important part of the equation. So our team developed the course, facilitate e-learning sessions, and implemented it. We now have half of the trainers ready to implement blended learning. Next, we needed developers for e-learning materials. So we also trained trainer developers to populate our LMS. Number four, since there is a problem in internet connection in all over the country, we devised a way to utilize available courses offline using Raspberry Pi. Number five, there are courses that are very dynamic, such as ICT courses. So we are partnering with providers of ICT courses to be able to offer updated and in-demand courses. And last, our team is continuously having researches and experimental approaches to improve this system. These are the efforts being implemented by the Philippine TVET with the implementation of the TESDA online program through blended learning, the strong support of TESDA management and the Philippine government as a whole. We are very optimistic that the TESDA online program can help bridge learners and the industry with an effective and efficient TVET system. That's all, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Madeline. It's great to see a platform that's scaled up and being managed by a government entity. And this comes with unique opportunities to reach such a large portion of the labor market, and it's such a critical time. It's amazing to see also the breadth of sectors that the program is able to cover. These challenges that you mentioned around internet access and student comfort around online trainings are definitely something that I've heard in many other meetings these past couple months. So it's great to see these solutions that you provided, and I'm sure they can be adapted to many other country contexts in the region. Thanks again for sharing, Madeline. Before we proceed with our second speaker, maybe we'll jump into our second audience poll. So here we have it posted now. This question is, in your opinion, who should be mainly responsible for improving the match between labor market demand and education? Government, academia, educational institutions, private or public, or private sector industries or business? Please submit your responses. We'll close the polls in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we have a close tie between government and academia, and slowly behind private sector. So it's actually relatively spread out, and this I think does speak true that it is everyone's business to make sure that labor market demand and education is improving the coordination between the two. So we can move on to our next speaker for today. And maybe he can give a little more insight here on that. Mr. Hector Lin, the Director for AI and Technology at JobCred in Singapore. Hector serves as Singapore's Country Director on the board of the Asia Pacific Career Development Association. He's also the Secretary General of the People and Career Development Association of Singapore. And this afternoon, he'll be discussing his experience on using AI for skills anticipation and planning. With this, I'll hand over the mic to you, Hector. Thanks.
Thank you, Anika. Next slide, please. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm Hector here. Very nice to meet you at this fantastic webinar. Today, I'm going to share how AI can be used to perform skills anticipation and planning to guide students and individuals into the new digital economy. The most significant investments that people, firms, and governments can make in the changing nature of work are in enhancing human capital. Next, please. In the changing talent landscape of today, at the start of the decade, 72% of education providers believe that their graduates are ready for work, but less than half of students and employers actually agree to that. At the end of the decade, 3 in 4 Singaporeans say that they weren't taught enough skills to excel at work, and millennials feel the worst prepared. Into the next decade, by 2030, 2 billion youth worldwide will lack the skills needed to participate in the workforce. Next, please. Conventionally, we see a serious time lag. It takes a long time to pass information, coordinate, and play catch-up between companies, workforce, and education institutions. Next, please. Conventional methods of skills demand assessment are typically slow and expensive to conduct. The results are not real-time and gets outdated quickly in our fast-changing world of work. Next, please. Today, I would like to share how technology and AI can help us to rethink and innovate on how we do skills anticipation and planning. Next, please. In contrast to a linear approach, we use technology to build dynamic skills frameworks. We use AI to profile every student and personalize what skills they have and what skills they do not have, and match the relevant training programs to their unique skill gaps. Next, please. We use big data analytics to decode employer demand and predict future skill requirements. By using intelligent skill gap analysis, we are able to personalize digital career guidance for every student and individual. Following that, we use automated mapping of curriculum to granular skills and modular education to service youth and adults. Using a tech-driven approach, we are aiming and achieving real-time, agile, and targeted recommendation to help students navigate the future of work. Next, please. I'm now going to share some of the data-driven insights that we have delivered for some of the projects that we have worked in. Next, please. This is a research piece for Bangladesh that we have done for ADB. And what we have done here is to look at regional market insights for the top 20 job titles by demand for the IT sector. Next, please. For each of the job roles, we are able to show from our big data the list of skills required for every job role and be able to use a data-driven approach to rank their importance relative to each of the job roles for the IT industry. Of course, apart from the IT industry, the data is also able to cover other sectors and industries. Next, please. Here is an overview of the implementation steps we take to introduce technology to support workforce transformation, from labor market demand research to skills framework development, to curricular adaptation, to teacher training, to skills and career development guidance, to providing capability development for training providers, translating that to placement outcomes relating to employment, and finally to employer workforce transformation. Next, please. Finally, I'd like to wrap up my presentation with a couple of case studies. So let me show you the next one. Next, please. This is for a labor market research project we did in Myanmar to identify the jobs and skills in demand. Next, please. And this one case study is one in which we use big data to help Nigerian universities to modernize their competency and training framework for both the academic and non-academic staff. Next, please. Thank you for your attention. Nice to meet you. Here are my contact details. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free, we can speak more. Thank you. Back to you, Anika.
Thank you, Hector, for sharing that. This really looks like an amazing tool to be able to not just support governments in their planning, but also to be able to give students a map in where they can direct their efforts in building their skills for the careers that they want. I know it can seem very overwhelming for many young adults to know where to start, which skills are companies going to be looking for, what do I already have, where do I need to go. So this is a great digital solution for that. Thank you for sharing. Before we move on to our third speaker, let's look at our third audience poll for today. Let's see, we have, so the question posed is, what do you see as the main challenge related to digital learning during the COVID-19 pandemic? Lack of digital platforms for online classes, lack of supplementary digital lesson materials, insufficient readiness of teachers to deliver online instruction, lack of access to technology and or internet, or low ICT literacy of students. All right. Please select your answer now. We'll be closing the polls shortly in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I know it might be hard to choose between all of these. There are many challenges facing learning nowadays. But okay, yes, we have the highest percentage here, a little less than half replying on the lack of access to technology and or the internet. And definitely a challenge for many of our developing member countries here in the region. And even in developed countries where I think the bandwidth might not be as sufficient for some of these programs. So that's great. Thank you for sharing. So let's, and thank you to everyone for participating in the polls for today. So for our third speaker, we have Mr. David Linke from EduGrowth. David has decades of experience across the education sector, having led Asia Pacific operations of global listed EdTech companies and founding and exiting EdTech businesses, and is a strategic and advocate, supporter, and champion of the Australian EdTech sector at home and abroad. And this afternoon, he'll give us an overview of the Australian EdTech sector and how it's connecting EdTech and cities. Over to you, David.
Anika, thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's joining us today. And before I begin, I will pause to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I come. I'm an Australian and I pause to acknowledge the Indigenous owners of the land that I'm on. And I am coming to you from the Woiwurrung and the Woiwurrung people of the Gadigal Nation. So I pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, and especially any Indigenous people that are with us today. So I'm really excited to be here, and I just want to give you a quick insight to the Australian EdTech ecosystem and how you may connect EdTech companies and build an EdTech ecosystem around your region. So next slide, thank you. As a quick introduction, there are 600 Australian EdTech companies. These are companies that are originated here or are founded by Australians. They employ 13,000 people and they generate $2.2 billion worth of revenue. Thank you. They're spread across the country, and if you know Australia at all, you'll know that essentially we are looking at the east coast here with the majority of Australian EdTech companies, Sydney being our largest location, then Melbourne with 33%, Brisbane with 13%, and then the rest spread into the other economic regions. Thank you very much. Next slide. What we're seeing is a huge growth in the Australian EdTech ecosystem. So if you think about it, 50% of these 600 companies are what we would call early stage startups. That means they have less than $500,000 worth of revenue and they employ less than 5 people. And this is a really important point because this sector is growing really quickly. And more than half of these 600 Australian EdTech companies did not exist 5 years ago. So that's a really exciting opportunity. I'm interested to see what it looks like into the future. Next slide. This is where these companies are focused. So we have a very small portion looking at providing solutions to early childhood and learning environments. We've got K-12 schools, where 42% of them are supplying, higher education, vocational training, and then workforce. And this, what we've seen over the last few years is that a few years ago, there would have been more companies representing in higher education, but what we're seeing now, and it's a global trend, not just in Australia, it's actually around the world, we're seeing companies moving into workforce. The need to connect formal education to employment is incredibly important. And right now, the pandemic has also sort of heightened that response as well. Next slide. If you're an Australian EdTech company, you're also an exporter. So if you're generating more than $2 million worth of revenue, you are generating export revenue. So every company generating more than $2 million worth of revenue are generating export revenue, and 37% of their revenue is coming offshore. So if we go back to that earlier stat, of that $2.2 billion, $610 million of it will be export revenue. And the smaller companies in this market are also export revenue, doing export, and 30% of the revenue. And if we've left it out because the numbers are always a little bit challenging in those really early stage companies, but actually many of them are also focused on the export market. And many of them are focused on exporting into the our near neighbours, Southeast Asia and Central Asia. Thank you. Next slide. I put this up here because one of the things that you'll notice around education around the world is the vast majority of teachers and academics are females, but that's not the case in the EdTech sector. Only 25% of the Australian EdTech companies are founded or led by a female. So I put it up there just because it's a unique phenomenon. Education is dominated by women, but not the EdTech sector. And I think that may change over the next few years, especially because of the pandemic. Next slide. And this graph highlights that growth in the sector really clearly. This is specifically the K-12 school market, those that are focused, so these are EdTech companies focused on K-12 schools. And you can see back in the early 90s, we had a few, and today we have 237 companies who are supplying to them. Well, that's at the end of 2019, which essentially since 2014 and 2019, it's 100% growth in the market, which is a sort of really interesting phenomenon if it continues to go up that way. Thank you. So we need to think about, how do we build an EdTech ecosystem? What are the things that cities, states and national governments can do to drive this? And my view is there are 4 things that we need to think about. I encourage government agents to think about developing an innovation fund. This is a fund in which existing education providers, schools, universities, TAFEs, RTOs, skills trainers, workforce trainers can actually co-invest in digital transformation of their teaching and learning, and partnering with EdTech companies. EdTech development requires early and fast and deep collaboration between entrepreneurs and educators. So an innovation fund will drive that process. Next slide. We need to stimulate testbed and ideation programs. One of the things that you'll hear around the world with regards to developing and stimulating education technology innovation is really being able to get that product in the hands of the customer. And in many instances, that customer is the students themselves. So if we can build structured, formal, focused pilot programs that connect education institutions and EdTech companies to co-design and co-innovate together, you'll end up with much more education innovation and digital transformation. Next slide. Connected into this is we need to rapidly procure. One of the things that we really need to do is think about when we're expending government funds or we're expending large school-wide system funds or university and TAFE funds. We need to think about, how do we rapidly procure from earlier stage businesses so that we can drive innovation. The reality is innovation in education is the thing that's going to drive the next wave of student engagement. It's not going to come from incremental incremental innovation and transformation within universities, within institutions. It's going to come from a partnership. Next slide. And this is what I think that we need to do. We need to think about developing a platform for collaborative problem definition and co-design of the solution. So we need to do real collaboration where we have a range of entities, institutions that want to partner with the innovation ecosystem, that want to be part of that innovation ecosystem, where they define problems, they solve the problems for their institution, but at the same time they create products and innovation that can be used by other institutions. So those 4 strategies are together: create an innovation fund to drive the transformation, make sure that you co-develop and co-design ideas together, create rapid procurement models so that we don't get bogged down in government procurement, long tender processes, that we actually support earlier stage businesses, and finally co-design the problems together, so ensuring that there's great product market fit. Thank you very much. Next slide. And these are my details if you want to reach out. You can look at EduGrowth at any point in time. Handing back to you, Annika.
Thank you so much, David, for giving us insight into this Australian EdTech sector. It's exciting to see how rapidly this scene is moving there. We're all very aware of the many real challenges that COVID has brought on, but for many of these EdTech companies, it's also an opportunity to accelerate their goals. We always talk about needing something to really jolt the education sector. And maybe it's unfortunate that it's happening this way, but here is one catalyst. So with that, thank you so much to all of our speakers. We're going to open it up to the Q&A portion of this webinar. I can see we already have a couple questions here. Please feel free to continue sending in questions and indicate which speaker you're directing your questions to, or also if it's a joint question. All right. So for our first question here, I think this is, we can start with Hector, but possibly open it up to everyone. The question is, how do you train students in the flexibility to be able to relate to future job skills demands? Using present job skills demand may not match future demands. Over to you, Hector.
Hi, Annika. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Apologies, I'm trying to orientate on the system. Can I view the question on the Q&A? Is it written?
Yes, and I'll also type it out again here for you.
Thank you.
So it's how do you train students in the flexibility to be able to relate to future job skills demands?
I see.
And this might not be enough to match them in the future.
Thank you for your help. Now I have a good understanding of the question. So I think when I like the word in the question of using the word flexibility, and a lot of times that we talk about, right, is also a related term is agility. And when we come in to talk about having students to be equipped with the skills that is required in industry, right, the current challenge here is that a lot of the labor market information is a snapshot. So when you come and get information as a snapshot, right, what you learn will quickly become outdated by the time you graduate or complete the training. So in the work that technology can do onto this portion here is that the information, the labor market information is real-time in nature. And that information should be fed to both the student and to the training provider. So then that will reduce the information asymmetry and help people to better coordinate between the learning and curriculum development and the eventual application of skills at the workplace.
Thank you, Hector. Maybe I pass it over to Redolin. you have any thoughts on this as well? Or maybe we can first pass it over to David.
About what was the, sorry, you asking me to answer the question that you asked Hector, is that right? Just to clarify.
Yes, if you have any other thoughts on that.
I think that there's a really important thing that we need to think about. I'm not in the best place to say how do we train students to be flexible to relate to future skill demand. My view is that it's very difficult for any education platform to actually teach future skills. I think that they need to teach the skills around frameworks and ensuring that students are best prepared for whatever might come. And that's the point around flexibility, right? The reality is, I don't think right now we can say, this is what the job in 10 years time or 20 years time or 30 years time is going to be. So if we teach students from an Australian context around 21st century thinking skills, around mindfulness, around creativity, around thinking about beyond the actual skill set or the technical skills, but more around those thinking patterns. They're the things that I feel are really incredibly important, because that gives the student the flexibility for whatever does come to them into the future. And there's no doubt that if you go back sort of 20 years, and I've unfortunately or fortunately, whichever way you think about it, been around education for long enough to know that back 20 or something years ago, maybe even 30 years ago, we were teaching students in our schools specific technologies, when in fact what they needed was the frameworks and the thinking patterns far more important. And that's what comes with starting to do active pedagogy, starting to think about adaptive pedagogy, starting to be able to teach the student at the point of need.
Thank you, David. Maybe we can move on to a second question. Here we have something. What are some good examples of collaborative models that David, that you've mentioned, and how do we attract companies into this collaboration?
Wow, this is I wish I could point specific to the collaboration, right? Because there are examples of them. Some of them are not necessarily public, but I'll give you two examples that are public. So there's an example of a company, an Australian company called Practera, and they have an experiential learning platform that is used within the university sector to do the connection I've just talked about, which is how do you take students and give them real world skills within their courses and then connect them to industry. So the experiential learning platform was being used by Northeastern University in the US, and they were getting great results. The point is Northeastern then ended up buying part of the company. So they used the product in the first instance, they saw that it worked, and then they actually invested in it because they wanted to continue to take that to other universities across the North American market. So that's one example of it. Another similar example here in Australia is an example of a company called Open Learning, which has got great traction into Southeast Asia, into Central Asia. And they have an online learning tool, almost like a bit like a MOOC platform. I'm sure they'd be unhappy if I called it just a MOOC platform, because it's much more than that. And they have a micro-credentialing platform as well, I think it's called Open Creds. They're an example that they went and partnered with a couple of universities here locally in Australia. Then they started partnering with Malaysian universities. The end result right now is they're publicly listed, but actually in that listing process, what happened was the Australian Catholic University actually bought into the IPO, and they own part of that business as well. So back to the collaboration, I think that what we need to be thinking about is two things. What's the role of the education institution in the collaboration? And then what do they get out at the end of it? I've given you two examples where they've invested. I don't think it's a requirement, because I wouldn't like to think of public universities owning large portions of commercial entities. But I think they need to be great first customers. They need to be fantastic first customers and going out and co-designing a solution and then actually implementing it and giving efficacy to it. And there are lots of models of those things.
Great. Thanks, David. Renlin, it seems that from the TESDA online platform that you've also had a lot of experience in this as well, needing to gain some buy-in from the private sector for some of these partnerships. Could you share on those experiences? Sorry, Ren, can you hear?
Sorry?
Yes.
Which question was? The audio is very weak, sorry. What questions?
The question, or it's an adaptation of the question. So examples of how, I guess, how your platform has been collaborative and what you did to attract companies to collaborate with the TESDA platform.
Okay, in the process of developing courses, we have our SMEs or our subject matter experts coming from the industry. So if we were developing a course from tourism, we would get a subject matter expert working in the industry itself, so that there is an alignment between the requirements of the industry and the course that is being developed. That is also one way that we can infuse current practices into the courses, because when we rely on the competency standards or our training regulations, it would just give us the minimum requirements. Whereas when we get uh, subject matter experts as our SMEs, then they can freely infuse the new technologies that they are using in the industry that where they are having their jobs.
Thank you. Hector, I'm not sure, do you have thoughts on this? I'm not sure if you've had to do any collaboration around your platform.
Nothing more to add. Yeah.
Right. So I see another question that's come up from the audience. And I think maybe Renal has also touched on this in her presentation, but which e-learning courses have been of special interest during the COVID-19 pandemic? Do you see any patterns? Maybe we can start again, back to Redolin, and then
For our TESDA online program, let me answer that, please. For the TESDA online program, entrepreneurship is the top course being taken by our users during the pandemic. Apart from that, we have ICT, so they were very interested on ICT courses, and tourism, because there are a lot of tourism courses in our platform. But we were surprised that entrepreneurship was the top sector that had the that users are interested in.
I just based on that response, I was thinking, Hector, I mean, for something as broad as entrepreneurship, is that something that your platform looks into, like the different skills that are needed for entrepreneurship and how those might be ranked?
Yeah. So from my experience, I think for the past year defined by COVID, right? I think the type of training that has become pretty interesting, at least in Singapore, right, is to talk about skills that are transferable in nature. So that comes in to really look at the taxonomy cutting across all the different sectors and industries. And more people who are suffering in certain industries, they are keen to know what skills can I learn to do a career switch to another sector or to another function. So that could be a technical skill in nature, or it can also be a soft skill. So in our term in Singapore, we call it the critical core skill. So that could be centered around communication skills, leadership, adaptability, right? So importantly, I think the other notion that I'd like to put forward to enrich the discussion is about the ability to look into what are the skills that can actually help you to become more mobile in terms of your career, that gives you more transferable skill set to make you more versatile as a worker.
Thank you. Another question, interesting question that I see popping up is, what about e-teaching or like learning for senior citizens as the world demography is fast changing, and there are many people older than 60 years who are still willing to stay in the market, this idea of lifelong learners. Maybe I can hand it over to David first to see, if there are, if this is a growing area in EdTech.
I don't think that there are people specifically in the Australian market that are going out to train senior citizens on skills of the future. There's no doubt that there is a focus of that in Australian public institutions. So there are public institutions such as universities, or what we would call TAFEs, technical and further education entities, and also the Australian Council of ACE, I think Australian Council of, I can't think of the second, the education, but there's I'm missing an acronym, part of the acronym there. But I know CAE, Council of Adult Education, that's what I'm thinking of. And there are people who are doing that space. As far as technical use of it, I think it's a combination of two things. One is that the hard skills to actually look at jobs, right? Like the reality is that 60-year-olds are not ready for retirement just yet, and certainly not in the Australian context. And so there are those hard skills. As far as soft skills are concerned, I think that that's one of those things that is just going to come as a bit of a byproduct. And there's no doubt that there's a combination of teaching the hard skills, but also keeping them relevant using technical skills. But I don't think that there's any specific EdTech company that I'm aware of that's specifically targeting that sort of 60 plus worker.
Thank you for that response, David. Actually, I see that we are we're at the end of our time for this webinar. There's many other questions that we'd like to delve into. But I think we might have to wrap it up here. I'd like to first of all thank DDG Kawaki and our speakers, Redalyn Agub, Hector Lin, and David Linke for sharing your insight today, and of course our participants for joining the discussion and asking all of your questions. I've definitely learned a lot myself, and hope to test out some of these platforms in the near future. As you see, our next webinar will be on January 12th of next year, and we'll discuss software-based sustainable mobility master planning. If you'd like to get invitations and updates for the upcoming sessions, as I said before, please do sign up to the mailing list using the QR code or link on the top right of the screen. As I mentioned earlier before, there was you'll all receive an email with the link to the with a post-webinar evaluation form, a copy of the presentations, and the webinar recording. Oh yes, and you can follow us on our social media platforms where we post content about our trust fund activities, updates, and upcoming events. On behalf of our speakers and our organizing team, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you on January 12th, 2021 for our next webinar. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.